We've been in an important series on the four horsemen of the American apocalypse and our six trials by fire. We've been drilling down to each of the horsemen with experts who studied the adversary and focused on combating them. The third of these four dangerous horsemen is color-coded blue. It's globalism, the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum. To help us better understand the threat, I've invited in a friend, a trusted colleague, and really a true expert in this for the battle to save Western civilization. It's the amazing Alex Newman. Alex is an award-winning journalist. He's an educator, an author, a speaker, a TV and radio host, and a consultant who seeks to glorify God in everything. I can't think of a better thing to say about a person. And in addition to his role as senior editor of the New American magazine and host of the New American's nationally syndicated radio show, Behind the Deep State, Alex serves as president of Liberty Sentinel Media. He's written for a wide variety of publications in the United States and abroad, including some of the most widely read and influential publications. I consider Alex one of the best journalists in America, an incredible thinker, a writer, and leader. He's a highly valued friend and a fellow warrior in the fight to preserve and advance Western civilization. Welcome, Alex.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you very much for having me and for that very kind introduction.
You know, we've got a lot to cover in a very short period of time. I want to start with this thesis. We've said that there are four color-coded threats. They're horsemen working together to bring about the end of America and to divide our spoils after they've taken us down. These are the red, the green, the blue, and the yellow. I've also said that we're experiencing six trials by fire, each of which builds on the others and reinforces them. We've already covered communist China as the red with Frank Gaffney and Sharia-adherent Islam as the green with Peter McElvena. With you, I'd like to discuss the blue, the globalism. How would you define globalism?
Well, thanks again, Kevin. Globalism, very simply, is an ideology, and it holds that we should eliminate nations and the nation state as the principal organizing unit of geopolitics and move toward an increasingly global system of government, politics, economics, and in many strands of globalism, even religion. There are now very serious and highly advanced efforts to bring all the religions of the world together. So it's an ideology, and there are communists who are also globalists. There are Islamists who are also globalists. They have different ideas on what the final product might look like. But I would argue that, to just put it really, really simply, globalists want to do away with nations and bring us all under a one-world system.
You know, I look back in history and I see the League of Nations that happened at the time of Woodrow Wilson. And then we have the forming of the United Nations. And you taught me something about the United Nations and the very first Secretary General of the forming group to form the United Nations. Tell us about Alger Hiss.
So Alger Hiss was a critical figure in American history and in world history. He was very close with FDR. He was involved in a lot of the worst decisions made by the U.S. government in the midst of World War II that somehow helped and aided our ally, Joseph Stalin. But when you look at his role in the founding of the United Nations, it takes on a whole new level of importance. So he had been a State Department official. He had been, as I mentioned, very high up in the U.S. government. He'd also worked in the nonprofit sector. He was a bigwig at Carnegie. But he essentially shepherded the birth of the United Nations. He was the chairman of the conference that wrote the UN Charter and then ended up serving as the first leader of the UN. And not too long after that, he was actually prosecuted by a young and ambitious prosecutor, Richard Nixon, and he was convicted of perjury because we found out he was an agent. He was an actual agent of Joseph Stalin, the mass murderer who had enslaved the Soviet Union.
So he was a Russian spy, Soviet spy in the United States, serving in our government and leading us into this United Nations that has spawned out of it. The World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum is not directly tied, but it has this similar philosophy. And, you know, how does George Soros or someone like him fit in?
Well, George Soros is one of the key money men for this entire push for globalism. And he also, incidentally, helps finance a lot of the Islamism, which would seem a little bit strange since ethnically, at least, he's Jewish. But he was one of the big sources of money for all these Hamas rioters that we saw on college campuses last year, which, you know, that doesn't make sense to a lot of people, but it is what it is. He's also a major financier of the globalist movement and also a major financier of the communist movement, as so many of the front groups for communism. So George Soros, I think, needs to be understood in the broader context of this globalist movement. He is not the originator of this. In fact, he got his start with a fund he created in Switzerland, the Quantum Fund. And his initial investors included the Rothschild banking dynasty, a very prominent and very globalist banking dynasty that has been close to the United Nations for decades and that incidentally continues to prop up communists. Baron Erich de Rothschild supported an actual card-carrying communist, Irina Bokova, to be the Secretary General of the United Nations before Guterres ended up taking over. So George Soros, as I see him, and I can say this confidently because he's been convicted in a court, he has made his fortune not through astute business acumen, but through insider information and through connections with other elitists. And he's being used to funnel enormous amounts of money into subversive movements that are aimed at destroying individual liberty, destroying the sovereignty of nations, and ultimately overthrowing Western civilization. And when you listen to the things he says, it's very telling. He has said repeatedly that he feels like God. He is, I think, a subversive individual who ought to be under investigation.
Well, and he was famous. I mean, he made his first $1 billion by breaking the Bank of England and destroying the British pound, which ironically kept them out of the euro. But it seems like his intention is to go to one world government, one world currency, and him sitting at the top, or now I guess his son Alex sitting at the top, who just funded and has become buddies with Zoran Memdani, who fits all three. Mamdani in New York is mayor. Is he a socialist/communist? Yes, check, self-admitted. Is he a Muslim 12er that follows after the 12er program like in Iran? Check, yes. And is he a globalist? I would argue yes. What do you say?
There's no question about it. And, I think they all kind of think they're using each other. I think the globalists think the communists are useful to their agenda. They think the Islamists are useful to their agenda. And I think George Soros very much falls in that category. He is a very nefarious individual. And if you actually look, about 15 years ago, he told the Financial Times that he thought Communist China should own the New World Order, that they have a better functioning government than the United States of America. Now, he's since had some differences of opinion, but that gives you some insight into the mindset of these people.
Yeah, well, Soros has, been made famous by people like you and Glenn Beck and a few others who just stated the facts. Here's the reality. There is a blue globalist movement. It shows up in the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, the IMF, and all these different, three-letter global things. And their intent is not to have America lead the world, but literally for America to be one nation among many if we have nations at all, open borders and all of that. All right, we're going to take a break, Alex. And when we come back, I'd like to talk a little more about those specific plans they have for us. We'll be right back.
Every day across the globe, big business agendas go unseen by investors. Things that go against your core values and beliefs. It's time to know your investments. Abortion, alternative lifestyles, gender and identity confusion. If you believe in protecting marriage and life, children, innocence, guarding masculinity, restoring families, defending religious liberty, invest with your values. Before investing, carefully consider the fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses of the investment company. This and other important information can be found in the fund's prospectus. To obtain a copy, visit timothyplan.com or call 800-846-7526. Read each prospectus carefully before investing. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal.
Gold holds its value far better than the US dollar. Let's see what happens when I go in this sweet shop and pay with gold. Can I pay with gold?
You can wait, find out how much it costs.
Do you know what? Basically, do you know why I'm even using gold?
I do not.
It holds its value over time, but it's a bit difficult to spend, isn't it? Do you take this?
Yes.
That's MasterCard. Yeah, but I'm actually going to pay with gold, believe it or not. Using this. That's my MasterCard, and it's linked to my gold wallet. So let's just watch that. Authorizing. Yeah, add a tip.
Thank you.
So this is your store?
Yes, sir.
And how much gold did I pay?
0.2243 grams.
Yeah, success. Bought with gold, paid with glitz.
We're talking with Alex Newman. He wrote a book, Deep State, The Invisible Government Behind the Scenes. I found this very informative, Alex, when I looked at it. In Chapter 11, you explained how Red China is a tool and creation of the deep state. Red China, deep state, which is tied to globalism. How are those connected?
Yeah, this is one of the most critical things for people to understand who are trying to figure out where we're going, globally speaking, in terms of geopolitics. Communist China came to prominence as a direct result of the subversive efforts of the deep state. We spoke about Alex Hiss earlier, a very high-ranking Soviet agent within our own government who helped birth the contemporary globalist movement and the architecture of global governance. Something very similar actually happened in China, where top-level State Department bureaucrats, military bureaucrats, deliberately handed China over from the nationalists under the leadership of Chiang Kai-shek, who was pro-American, who was Christian, who allied with us in World War II and suffered tremendously fighting the Japanese. Our government, and this came out in the Congressional Record, John F. Kennedy talked about, our government handed China over to the communists. People like George Marshall, they put an arms embargo on Chiang Kai-shek to hand China over to the communists. They knew that Stalin's plan was to declare war on Japan at the very end. I mean, he literally declared war on Japan after we dropped the nuclear bomb. Okay, so that tells you a little bit about how significant he was. And yet, as one of the victors in World War II, he was able to march into Manchuria, seize all those Japanese supplies, and hand them over to his buddy Mao and his communists. So they created Communist China. Over the decades that followed, they built up Communist China. And by the way, they didn't do this secretly, right? David Rockefeller and Henry Kissinger went over there in the early 1970s and came back and couldn't stop singing the praises of China. Go read David Rockefeller's op-ed in the New York Times, 1973. It's called From a China Traveler. He says, and I'm quoting, "The social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history." So after that, under the guise of countering the Soviet Union, we built up Communist China, we built up their industries, we built up their military power by building up their industries, and this has continued all the way to the present day. Klaus Schwab, the founder and former head of the World Economic Forum, boasted that for 40 years they were helping build up Communist China, and it continues to this day with Larry Fink, the current co-chair of the World Economic Forum. They're building up Communist China for a reason, not because necessarily they believe ideologically in communism, but because they see it as a template, as a pilot program, a model for the kind of system they're seeking at the international level. Zero freedom for the public, total control in the hands of government and those who agree with the government. And so it is at once a model for the global system they're trying to build, and also an engine. If you look, the United Nations, as just one example among many of these international organizations, is almost entirely now under the control of either Communist China or its agents and its allies, very much including people like Tedros Ghebreyesus, who runs the WHO. And this is very easy to document. You look at the 15 specialized agencies of the UN. A third of them are literally run by card-carrying members of the CCP from China. For perspective, an American runs one. So that kind of gives you a sense of where this is all going and why Communist China is so critical to understanding the big puzzle here.
Yeah, no, it is powerful. And what you just described, we pay the bulk of the UN budget. And yet we've cut that off under President Trump. But yet we have very little control. They have a lot of control. I remember meeting someone from the PLA in Washington who admitted she was with the PLA, People's Liberation Army of China. And I asked, if I tell this, will you whack me? And she said, no, we own half this town. I said, who owns the other half? She said the Saudis at the time. I might say the Qataris, but I want to lend in, so we've got the red axis connected to the blue axis. I want to throw the green in here because the story you told about what we did in China sounds an awful lot like there's a very pro-America leader, we abandon the pro-America leader, and then uprises someone who hates America. That sounds like what we did in Iran. Were the globalists involved in that as well?
They absolutely were. The overthrow of the Shah, another shameful episode of the deep state in the United States overthrowing a friendly American leader and replacing him with an anti-American zealot or an anti-American regime that could then be used to help weaken and ultimately destroy the United States as the global hegemonic power. And there are so many examples of this, Kevin. I mean, Cuba is another perfect example. Nobody's going to argue that Fulgencio Batista was like the greatest leader ever, but he supported free markets. Cuba was an incredibly prosperous and a relatively free society under his leadership. The New York Times, the Council on Foreign Relations, they said Fidel Castro is a freedom fighter. He's the George Washington of Latin America. Our government aided and abetted his takeover, even though our ambassador there, Earl Smith, was saying he's a communist, he's a Soviet agent. So there are so many examples of this, Kevin. It really makes you wonder if there are any remaining people in Washington, D.C., at least until recently, who have America's best interests at heart.
These are the globalists. Another globalist I'll pick on, he was a senator from Texas, became president of the United States after being vice president when President Kennedy was shot, Lyndon Johnson. He started the Great Society, and the Great Society started funding a lot of these programs, USAID and all the other things that came from it, and he left Richard Nixon, not my favorite president, but he left him with a very tough situation in 1971. We were spending more money than we could afford. We had the world's reserve currency, and people wanted to exchange our currency for gold. He closed the gold window. And then what did he do? You mentioned it earlier. He ran off to China, first thing, yes, to blunt the Soviet Union, but also to get cheap goods to be sold into Americans and keep them happy, and he shifted all our manufacturing overseas. Then he went to Saudi Arabia, improving the green by creating the petrodollar. We'll protect your interests if you will recycle all the money you get from oil, only charge dollars for it, and recycle it back into treasury bonds, and then invest it in the United States. And what are they doing? They invested in mosques. So I think a lot of this is tied to the fact that we abandoned the dollar system, where dollar being backed by gold. And even Klaus Schwab, I looked this up, the second Davos Forum, the really first World Economic Forum, on their own website came about because Nixon left the gold standard. He list it right there and say that's why we've done it. Essentially, we abandoned truth and value in our monetary system, and that gave free rein to print as much money as they want for the globalists to take over the world.
Absolutely, Kevin. And it also facilitated the shipping of our productive capacity overseas to communist China, to other places. And they're continuing this, by the way, all the way up through today. Now, Trump is trying to put a stop to it, but the climate scam is a perfect example. They're using, for example, the end of the gold standard, the climate scam, to ship our factories, ship our jobs to places like communist China to build them up for the purposes we already described.
Yeah, and you use the climate scam not loosely. You use it, actually, it's well defined as a scam, even admissions that they're falsely reporting, falsely reading. Give us 20 seconds on that.
The hypothesis that human emissions of CO2 is causing climate change is utterly ludicrous from a scientific perspective. The truth is, from a totalitarian perspective, it's perfect, because everything you do produces CO2, including breathing, and so it's a tool for control. It's a tool for taking down the American economy in the West and shipping all of our power and production to China.
It's one of the tools. They have others, like central bank digital currency and so forth. We're talking with Alex Newman. We'll be taking another break. We'll be right back with more and some solutions.
I'm outside Babe's, which I'm told is the quintessential chicken restaurant here in Roanoke, Texas. Let's go and see if we can buy the food in here, chicken with gold.
Gonna be the fried chicken.
This is unbelievable. How am I going to fit all this in? I seriously actually don't know how to begin with this. This is so overwhelming. Do you think I can pay with gold?
I don't know. You may have to ask the cashier. I don't handle it.
Can I pay with gold? But actually, you said I could pay with this? Okay, I'm gonna pay with this, but I'm gonna pay with gold. So look at the price of gold going up. That's pretty cool, yeah? Right, this is Babes, yeah? How much gold did I pay? Gold, how many grams?
0.26.
0.26, quarter of a gram of gold. How about that?
That's pretty cool.
That's pretty cool, yeah. Success! Bought with gold, paid with glint.
I'm Kevin Sorbo. When you spend money, you consider who you're buying from and the causes they support. If you don't, then you're likely supporting companies that are trying to destroy our country and take away our freedoms. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider. They're a cell phone company and a good one. They offer nationwide coverage on the best 4G and 5G networks along with 100% US-based customer support. But here's the deal. Patriot Mobile's mission has nothing to do with cell phones. They carry out their mission by giving back millions of dollars every year to Christian conservative causes that are actively engaged in the fight to save America. Voting is no longer enough to beat the woke. We have to band together, support like-minded companies, and vote with our dollars. That's how we win. Stop supporting companies that want to destroy America and join Patriot Mobile today by visiting patriotmobile.com or call 972-PATRIOT.
We're speaking with Alex Newman about the blue horse of the American apocalypse. It's globalism. And globalism fits into our 6 trials by fire. And I'm going to give you a test here, Alex. I'm going to name the 6 trials by fire that we've been covering and see if you can see a globalist impact on that if I name the trial. The first is debt. We've run up almost $40 trillion in debt. By the time this airs, it might be 41. I'm kidding, but it's growing that fast. How have globalists increased our debt?
If you look at the institutions and even the individuals responsible for creating the Federal Reserve System, who operate the Federal Reserve System, all the way to today, what you'll find is globalism is the ideology that unites them all. There are some kind of on the pseudo-right, and there are many who are on the left and even the far left, but globalist ideology is one of the threads that runs through all of these. So I would argue that the entire usurious and almost criminal monetary system that has produced this massive debt, not to mention the spending with the out-of-control politicians, goes right back to globalism in every way.
Okay, so globalism has caused the debt. The debt has led, though, to a dollar attack. And we have BRICS nations, IMF, World Economic Forum, all talking about displacing the dollar. How do they fit in? And why do they want to attack the dollar that they created that is paper and not backed by anything?
I believe this is the next phase of the globalist plan, Kevin, and it came out really clearly. I think for the first time ever, they really dropped the mask at the latest World Economic Forum summit in Davos. They're now in process of shifting away from what they call the unipolar world order to the multipolar world order, and the destruction of the dollar and perhaps the U.S. economy is going to be a critical part of that, to bring down the United States as the hegemonic power based, of course, on biblical values, the constitutional principles that made our country great. And as Rich Higgins put it, right, destroy the United States of America not just as a nation, but even as an ideal. So I think that's the next part of their plan, and then they'll redistribute power, wealth, etc., to Communist China, to Russia, to Brazil, to South Africa, to the regional governments like the European Union, and leave the United States, as you said at the beginning, as one kind of administrative province among many.
Okay, so that the debt, dollar. Third one that we talk about is central bank digital currency. That if the dollar's gone, they want to replace it with something. Are globalists involved in CBDC? The answer should be obvious, but go ahead.
Absolutely. CBDC is a globalist project from start to finish. The institutions that came up with these ideas, the institutions that are implementing it, the Bank for International Settlements being the apex of the system, as Carroll Quigley explained in his book Tragedy and Hope, Bill Clinton's mentor. So CBDC is entirely a globalist project meant to accelerate the shift of political and economic power from nation states to global institutions.
All right, so the next one is the wealth gap. When you have all of these, you create the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. How do the globalists view the wealth gap?
Well, they are responsible for the wealth gap. It goes right back to what we were discussing with the debt. The monetary system that we have today, as you know very well, Kevin, it actually serves as a wealth redistribution mechanism, but in a kind of a counterintuitive way. It doesn't take from the rich and give to the poor. It pumps the wealth of the poor and the middle class to the ultra-rich, to the uber elites. And so they're laughing all the way to the bank, and then they tell us, hey, we'll use socialism to redistribute our wealth, when they actually mean they'll redistribute more of your wealth. So it's all a globalist scam from start to finish.
Okay, the wealth gap leads naturally to a demographic problem, because if you're not making enough money, you feel like I can't have kids till later, I've got to delay marriage and all of that. And then they've also, globalists promoted a lot of things that have hurt the birthing of children, having a high birth rate. How does that happen?
The UN and its allies in the U.S. government have been the premier promoters of population control and childless living going back many decades. In fact, the UN has a whole agency dedicated to this. It's called the UN Population Fund. Trump just announced that we would be leaving. But it is a globalist project. The globalists have been telling us for decades that there's too many people consuming too many resources. The solution is less people. And yes, the wealth gap contributes to that, the indoctrination coming from UNESCO. I've got the UNESCO's books that they use in public schools around the world, telling children that Mother Earth is groaning every time it registers another birth. The effort to destroy demographically the Western world and ultimately the planet is anti-human, and it is thoroughly in line with the globalist agenda.
All right, and what you do is you promote abortion, killing babies, and you promote LGBTQ+, where you can't have babies without, expense and science and all those. And all right, so that's number 5. Number 6, the solution to the demographic problem, I just heard Chuck Schumer say it out loud, is, well, we don't have enough people, so we have to import immigrants. How is globalism tied into immigration?
The mass migration that we've seen, not just in recent years, but even going back decades across the Western world, in the UK, Western Europe, the United States, even in Australia, this is entirely a globalist project, and it always has been. And what you'll see is there's several really important goals that advance the globalist agenda. The first one is, as you bring massive numbers of foreign populations into a country, the whole concept of being a nation starts disintegrating. And I've lived in 4 different European countries, and I've watched this happen in real time. In a lot of the major Western European cities today, the native population's in the minority. In Brussels, in Belgium, the native population, less than 1 in 3 are actually Belgian. And so what happens is you wake up and you're surrounded by people who don't speak your language, don't share your culture, don't have anything at all in common with you. You say, well, what does it mean to be Belgian? Why do we have these arbitrary lines on a map? We'll be Europeans or eventually global citizens. The second benefit from the globalist perspective is that it erodes the Christian heritage, the Christian culture, which is still there even in these secularized societies. And that's one of, I think, the big reasons. Now you bring all these Muslims in, you can't have Christmas markets anymore. You can't have church steeples ringing bells. You can't have the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not murder. All that has got to go because we're now multicultural. So they understand this very well, and that's exactly why they did it, Kevin.
So the globalists are involved in all 3 of our 6 trials by fire, along with their buddies, the communists and the Sharia adherent Islamists. And then they're aided by the cowards, traitors, and fools, which is the yellow horse. All right, it's all demonic. There's no question about it. It's sad. We need to pray about this. What are 1 or 2 thoughts? What can we do to push back on the globalists?
It is absolutely demonic. It was God's idea to divide mankind into nations. He says it in Acts 17. He says it in Deuteronomy 32. Crystal clear. God divided mankind into nations. He fixed the borders of the people. So we need to be in prayer. We need to be reading our Bible. We need to be protecting the hearts and minds of our children from this globalist indoctrination masquerading as education in the public schools. And we need to get active in whatever realm or sphere God has called us to.
Okay, Alex, that's fantastic. Where can people go to follow you?
Thank you so much, Kevin. My website, libertysentinel.org. I'm also senior editor at The New American, and I'm a fellow at Classical Conversations, which is a great educational option for people who want real education for their children.
And we did that. My wife and I did Classical Conversations for a couple of years with our kids, and they did great with it. All right, we're going to summarize all of this in our free economic battle plan. You can get a copy of this at economicwarroom.com. Now remember, what we see as a marketplace, our enemies, they view it as a battle space. They don't see it as a marketplace. This is Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room.